I had spent 15 years building a life with Christian, 15 years of memories, struggles, and triumphs we'd shared together. So when he introduced me to Sara at our anniversary dinner, not as a colleague or a friend, but as someone special in my life, I felt my entire world collapse in an instant. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Instead, I did something that day that would forever change the course of all our lives and leave my husband completely speechless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. We met in college, Christian and I. I was studying architecture, drowning in blueprints, and model buildings, while he was the business major with ambitions that seemed larger than life. Our love story wasn't particularly unique. A coffee shop, a spilled latte, an offered napkin, and numbers exchanged. But it was ours. Or at least, I thought it was. He proposed on a rainy Tuesday evening in our tiny first apartment. Nothing fancy, no audience, just us. "Lori," he said, kneeling on our worn carpet, "you're the foundation I want to build my life on." For an architecture student, it was the perfect metaphor. I said yes before he could even finish asking the question. We built our life methodically, the way I designed buildings, with careful planning, solid foundations, and an eye toward the future. The early years were lean, but happy. Christian climbed the corporate ladder at Bryant Financial while I established my own small architecture firm. We moved from our cramped apartment to a modest house in the suburbs, painted every room ourselves, and planted a garden that never quite thrived despite our best efforts. We chose not to have children, a decision we revisited and reaffirmed every few years. Instead, we had our careers, our friends, our travel plans. We had each other. It wasn't perfect, no marriage is, but it was stable, reliable. At least that's what I believed. Our home became our sanctuary. A mid-century modern with large windows that let in streams of natural light. I had designed the renovation myself, transforming the dated interior into something that reflected both our tastes, Christian's preference for clean lines and my love of unexpected details. The kitchen where we'd cook together on Sunday evenings. The office where we'd sometimes work side by side in comfortable silence. The bedroom where we'd shared our deepest fears and greatest hopes. Our friendship group was small, but tight-knit. Jonah and Mabel had been with us from the beginning. We'd been in their wedding, they'd been in ours. Rose joined our circle later, a colleague of mine who quickly became more than just a work friend. And Mia, our newest addition, who Christian had met through a charity board they both served on. I was proud of what Christian and I had built together. 15 years of partnership, of sharing bank accounts and holiday traditions, and inside jokes that made no sense to anyone else. 15 years of having someone who knew exactly how I took my coffee and why certain songs made me cry. 15 years of trust. Work kept us both busy, perhaps too busy in recent years. Christian's position as CFO meant late nights and frequent business trips. My own firm had finally gained recognition, bringing in larger projects that demanded more of my attention. We were like planets in orbit around each other, connected but rarely colliding. I'd noticed the subtle changes, of course, the way Christian had become more protective of his phone, how our conversations had grown shallower, focusing on schedules and household matters rather than dreams and feelings. The new cologne he'd started wearing, the gym membership he'd suddenly found time for despite his supposedly crushing workload. But I'd dismissed these signs, buried my concerns under layers of trust and history. After all, we had built this life together, brick by brick. We had chosen each other, day after day, for 15 years. What was a little distance compared to that kind of foundation? Our 15th anniversary was approaching, and I was determined to reconnect, to cut through the growing silence between us and find my husband again. I made reservations at Meridian, the same restaurant where we'd had our first real date. I bought him a vintage watch similar to one his grandfather had owned. Christian had mentioned it once years ago, and I'd remembered. I had it engraved. Time has only made us stronger. Forever yours, Lori. I spent weeks planning the perfect evening, convinced that if I could just create the right moment, whatever was causing the distance between us would dissolve. We could course correct the way we always had before. After all, relationships ebbed and flowed. This was just a temporary low point, soon to be followed by a new high. The morning of our anniversary, I woke early. Christian was still asleep beside me, his breathing deep and regular. I studied his face in the soft morning light, the lines that hadn't been there when we'd met, the flecks of gray in his hair that had only appeared in the last few years. He was still so handsome to me, still the same man I'd fallen in love with, despite the ways we'd both changed. I slipped out of bed quietly, heading to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Fresh coffee, croissants from the bakery he loved, the strawberry jam he preferred but rarely bought for himself because he thought it too expensive. Small things, but I wanted everything to be perfect. When Christian finally emerged, he seemed distracted, barely glancing at the breakfast spread I'd prepared. "Happy anniversary," I said, pouring him coffee in the mug I'd given him on our 10th anniversary, the one with the skyline of the city where we'd met. "Oh," he said, blinking. "Right. Happy anniversary." He kissed my cheek, a quick, perfunctory gesture. "Listen, about dinner tonight, I was thinking we could try that new place, Azura, instead of Meridian. I've heard great things." I felt a flicker of disappointment, but pushed it aside. "I already made reservations at Meridian. For nostalgia's sake, you know?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, that's fine. What time?" 7, I replied, watching. His face carefully. "Is that okay?" "Perfect," he said, checking his watch. "I've got to run. Big meeting this morning." He grabbed his coffee, transferred it to a travel mug, and headed for the door. "Don't forget," I called after him. 7 o'clock, Meridian. He turned back, smiled. A smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I won't forget. It's our day." As the door closed behind him, I stood in our kitchen, surrounded by the breakfast he hadn't eaten, holding the anniversary card he hadn't noticed, feeling the first real crack in the foundation of everything I'd believed about our marriage. I spent the rest of the day in a state of nervous anticipation, trying to ignore the nagging voice in my head that whispered something wasn't right. Instead, I focused on preparing for the evening ahead, determined to make it special, despite Christian's lukewarm response that morning. After work, I came home and took my time getting ready. I chose a deep blue dress that Christian had once said brought out the color of my eyes. I curled my hair, applied makeup more carefully than usual, even wore the diamond earrings he'd given me on our 10th anniversary. Tiny but elegant, exactly my taste. The woman who looked back at me from the mirror seemed both familiar and foreign. There was hope in her eyes, but uncertainty too. The gift box with the vintage watch sat on my dresser, wrapped in silver paper with a simple navy ribbon. I ran, my fingers over it, imagining the moment I'd give it to him, hoping it would spark something: recognition, appreciation, love. Anything to bridge the growing gap between us. By 6:30, I was ready. Christian had texted that he'd meet me at the restaurant. Another late meeting, he claimed. It wasn't what I'd planned. I'd hoped we'd arrive together, but I was determined not to let it dampen my spirits. I grabbed my purse, the gift, and headed out. Meridian hadn't changed much since our first date all those years ago. The same warm lighting, the intimate tables set far enough apart for privacy, the attentive but unobtrusive service. They'd seated, me at a corner table with a view of both the entrance and the city skyline. The best table in the house, a small luxury I'd requested when making the reservation. As I waited, I ordered a glass of champagne, wanting to begin the celebration even before Christian arrived. The bubbles tickled my nose as I sipped, watching the door each time it opened. anticipating the sight of my husband. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At 7:15, I sent a text. I'm here, table in the back corner. Beautiful view. At 7:30, I ordered a second glass of champagne. At 7:45, I called him. No answer. By 8:04, the waiter had stopped by 3 times, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to understated pity. Would you like to order, ma'am, or wait a bit longer? Just a few more minutes, I said, forcing a smile. I'm sure he's just caught in traffic. I called Christian again. This time, he answered, background noise nearly drowning out his voice. Lori, hey, I'm sorry. Meeting ran late, and then there was an issue with the Thompson account. I'm just wrapping up now. It's our anniversary dinner, Christian, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I've been waiting for an hour. I know. I'm really sorry. I'll be there in 20 minutes, tops. Relief washed over me. He hadn't forgotten. He was just late. Okay, I'll be here. Great. Oh, and I'm bringing someone with me, a colleague. I want you to meet her. Before I could respond, he hung up. I sat there, phone still in hand, trying to process what he'd just said. A colleague? At our anniversary dinner? It was bizarre, completely inappropriate, yet somehow not entirely surprising given how disconnected we'd become. I ordered an appetizer to pass the time, though I had little appetite now. My mind raced with questions and scenarios, none of them reassuring. Why would Christian bring someone to our anniversary dinner? What colleague was so important? They couldn't wait until tomorrow? At 8:30, the door opened, and Christian walked in. Even after 15 years, the sight of him still caused a small flutter in my chest. Tall, confident, his dark hair now distinguished with silver at the temples. He scanned the restaurant, his eyes finding mine. I raised my hand in a small wave, smiling despite my confusion and hurt. Then I noticed the woman beside him. She was younger than me, maybe early 30s to my 42. Slim and stylish in a simple black dress that somehow looked far more expensive than anything in my closet. Her hair was a rich chestnut brown, falling in perfect waves past her shoulders. She moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly how attractive they were. As they approached the table, I stood, smoothing my dress nervously. Christian didn't kiss me or touch me at all. Another deviation from our norm that felt deliberate rather than accidental. Lori, he said, his voice formal in a way that sent a chill through me. This is Sara. She's been consulting on the Thompson project. Sara extended her hand, her smile revealing perfect teeth. It's so nice to finally meet you, Lori. Christian talks about you all the time. I shook her hand automatically, noting the firmness of her grip, the flawless manicure, the absence of a wedding ring. Does he? I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Funny, he's never mentioned you. An awkward silence fell as we all sat down. The waiter appeared, seeming to sense the tension, and took their drink orders efficiently before retreating. So, I said, looking directly at Christian, this is a surprise. I gestured toward Sara. I wasn't expecting company for our anniversary dinner. Sara's smile faltered slightly, her eyes darting to Christian. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. A nervous habit I knew well. Sara and I have been working closely on this project, he began. And we've developed a connection. I stared at him, waiting for more, though I already knew what was coming. The restaurant seemed to fade away, the ambient noise, the other diners, even Sara's perfect face blurred at the edges. All I could see clearly was Christian, the man I'd loved for 15 years, about to shatter everything we'd built. Lori, he continued, his voice dropping lower. I don't know how to say this, but Sara isn't just a colleague to me. She's become someone special in my life. The words hung in the air between us, impossibly heavy. Someone special, not just a colleague. The meaning was unmistakable, yet my mind scrambled to find some other interpretation, some explanation that wouldn't destroy 15 years of marriage in a single moment. I don't understand, I said, though I did. I understood perfectly. Christian glanced at Sara, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. The intimate gesture sent a fresh wave of pain through me. They had clearly discussed this moment, rehearsed it perhaps. While I had been planning our anniversary celebration, my husband had been planning how to introduce his girlfriend to me. "Lori," Christian said, leaning forward slightly, "I didn't want to hurt you. This wasn't planned. It just happened." A sudden, inappropriate laugh escaped me. "Wasn't planned? You brought her to our anniversary dinner. How is that not planned?" Sara shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Maybe I should give you two some privacy." "No," I cut her off, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "You're apparently part of this now. You should stay." The waiter returned with their drinks, his professional demeanor never wavering despite the obvious tension at our table. "Are you ready to order?" he asked. "I think we need a few more minutes," Christian replied, not meeting my eyes. As the waiter retreated, I took a long sip of my champagne, now flat and warm. The evening I had so carefully planned was unraveling spectacularly, transforming from a celebration of love into, what? A breakup? A confession? A humiliation? "How long?" I asked quietly. Christian hesitated. "Lori, how long?" He exhaled slowly. 8 months. 8 months. While I was designing the Wilson project, while we were planning our trip to Portugal, while I was sleeping beside him every night, believing in our marriage despite the distance I'd felt growing between us. 8 months of lies. I thought back to all the late meetings, the business trips, the texts he'd shielded from my view. All the signs had been there, glaring and obvious in retrospect. I just hadn't wanted to see them. "When did you meet?" I asked Sara directly. Ignoring Christian's attempt to interject, she looked startled, as if she hadn't expected to be addressed. "At a conference in Chicago, last September." I nodded slowly. Chicago. The conference Christian had extended by 2 days for networking opportunities. The one he'd returned from different somehow, more distant, checking his phone more frequently, smiling at private messages. "And when did it become more than professional?" I pressed. "Lori, does this really matter?" Christian asked, a hint of irritation creeping into his voice. "It matters to me," I replied evenly. I'd like to understand when exactly my husband decided our marriage wasn't worth honoring anymore. Sara looked down at her hands. It was gradual. We were working late. On the Thompson project, dinners turned into more. "And you knew he was married?" I couldn't help asking. "Yes," she admitted, having the grace to look at least somewhat ashamed. "He told me about you from the beginning. But that didn't stop you." It wasn't a question. She finally met my eyes. Directly. No, it didn't. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Around us, other diners enjoyed their meals, celebrating birthdays and promotions and anniversaries, unaware of the implosion happening in our corner of the restaurant. "So what happens now?" I finally asked, looking at Christian. "Were you planning to ask for a divorce tonight, on our anniversary? Or was this just an introduction, and we'd all continue on with you splitting your time between your wife and your someone special?" Christian ran a hand through his hair, another nervous gesture I knew intimately. "I want to do this right. Lori, I respect you too much to drag this out or lie anymore. Yes, I want a divorce. I've already spoken to a lawyer about the process." The final blow. He'd consulted a lawyer before consulting me about the end of our marriage. I felt oddly calm, as if I were watching the scene from outside my body. The gift box with the vintage watch seemed to mock me from where it sat on the table, a symbol of a relationship that had apparently ended long before I realized it. "And when were you planning to tell me all this, if I hadn't insisted on an anniversary dinner?" I asked. Christian at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Soon. I was waiting for the right moment. And our anniversary dinner with your girlfriend present seemed like the right moment?" I couldn't keep the bitter edge from my voice. "That wasn't the plan," he admitted. "But when you insisted on dinner tonight, and Sara and I had just finalized the Thompson deal, it seemed like a sign. A chance to be honest, finally." "Honest," I repeated, the word tasting sour in my mouth. After 8 months of lies. Sara, who had been watching our exchange silently, suddenly spoke up. "Christian thought it would be better this way. Clean, direct, better than sneaking around." I turned to her, taking in her earnest expression. She genuinely seemed to believe they were doing the right thing. That there was a right way to destroy someone's marriage. "And what about our house?" I asked Christian, thinking of the home we'd lovingly renovated together. "Our savings? The trip to Japan we've been planning for 2 years? We can divide everything fairly," he said, sounding relieved to discuss practical matters instead of emotions. "I thought you might want to keep the house. I can find an apartment downtown, closer to the office." Closer to Sara, I thought, though I didn't say it aloud. "And I understand if you want to cancel the Japan trip," he continued. "The deposits are mostly refundable." It was all so neat, so considered. While I had been buying anniversary gifts and planning romantic dinners, Christian had been calculating how to divide our assets and extricate himself from our life together. I looked at them both sitting across from me. Christian, the man I had loved for 15 years, and Sara, the woman he had chosen instead. They weren't being deliberately cruel. That was perhaps the worst part. They genuinely believed they were handling this difficult situation with maturity and consideration. The full weight of what was happening finally hit me. My marriage was over. The future I had planned, the life I had built, had disappeared in an instant. And I was sitting in a restaurant I had chosen for its romantic significance, being told all this on my anniversary, with a gift for a man who no longer wanted me sitting untouched on the table. "May I see your phone?" I asked Christian suddenly. He blinked, caught off guard by the request. "My phone? Why?" "I just want to see something," I said, my voice calm despite the storm raging inside me. Christian hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and handed me his phone. It was unlocked, a small mercy that spared me the humiliation of asking for his passcode. I opened his photos and began scrolling. Christian shifted uncomfortably, but didn't try to stop me. Sara watched with wide eyes, clearly uncertain about where this was going, and there they were. Dozens of photos of them together, at restaurants, on hikes, in what appeared to be hotel rooms. Christian's arm around her waist, Sara kissing his cheek. Selfies taken in places I recognized from Christian's supposed business trips. Evidence of a parallel life he'd been living while I remained oblivious. But what truly knocked the breath from my lungs was a photo taken in our home, our bedroom. Sara lounging on our bed, wearing one of Christian's shirts, looking completely at ease in the space I had considered sacred to our marriage. "You brought her to our home?" I whispered, turning the phone so Christian could see exactly which photo I was referring to. "To our bedroom?" Christian paled. "Lori, I can explain—" "When?" I demanded, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to maintain composure. "When was she in our home?" He swallowed hard. "Last month, when you went to visit your sister for the weekend." I nodded slowly, remembering how clean the house had been when I returned, how the sheets had smelled of fresh laundry, how Christian had been unusually attentive that evening. Now I understood why. "And here," I continued, swiping to another photo. "This is your parents' cabin, the one they left to us." The The cabin where we'd spent countless weekends, where we'd talked about retiring someday. Another sacred space. Invaded. "Lori," Christian began, reaching for his phone. I held it away from him, continuing to scroll. "What about our friends? Does everyone know except me? Am I the only one who's been kept in the dark?" Sara spoke up, her voice soft but steady. "No one in your social circle knows. Christian has been very discreet." I laughed, a hollow sound even to my own ears. Very discreet. How considerate of him. I handed the phone back to Christian, unable to bear seeing any more evidence of their relationship. The truth was now undeniable, concrete. Not just his words, which I might have been able to doubt or minimize, but photographic proof of how completely he had betrayed our marriage. "When you said someone special, I didn't realize you meant someone you've been living a double life with for 8 months, I said. "Someone you've taken to our home, to family property, on trips I thought you were taking for work." Christian looked genuinely remorseful, though whether he regretted his actions or merely being caught, I couldn't tell. "I never meant for this to happen, Lori. You have to believe that." "Actually, I don't have to believe anything you say anymore," I replied. "You've forfeited that right." I turned to Sara, studying her face. This woman who had become central to my husband's life, while remaining completely unknown to me. "Do you love him?" I asked directly. She seemed surprised by the question but didn't hesitate. "Yes, I do." "And you, Christian? Do you love her?" He nodded, not quite meeting my eyes. "Yes. More than you love me," I said. It wasn't a question. "Differently," he offered, as if that might somehow soften the blow. "What Sara and I have is different. Newer," I suggested. "More exciting. Without the history, the mortgage, the compromises, the hard parts." "That's not fair," Christian protested. "None of this is fair," I countered. "But it is what it is." I reached for my purse, suddenly desperate to be anywhere but here, sitting across from my husband and his girlfriend, on what should have been a celebration of our marriage. The anniversary gift sat untouched on the table, and for a moment I considered leaving it, let him wonder forever what might have been inside. But some petty part of me wanted him to know exactly what he was throwing away. I pushed the silver-wrapped box toward him. "Happy anniversary." Christian stared at the gift, conflict evident on his face. "Lori, you don't have to open it," I insisted. "I went to a lot of trouble to find it." Slowly, reluctantly, he unwrapped the box, lifting the lid to reveal the vintage watch nestled on its velvet cushion. Even Sara leaned forward, unable to hide her curiosity. Christian's expression changed as he recognized what it was. A nearly exact replica of his grandfather's watch, the one he'd described to me years ago with such nostalgia. He lifted it carefully, turning it over to discover the engraving. "Time has only made us stronger. Forever yours, Lori." "This is," he began, his voice thick. "I remembered," I said simply. "That's what people who truly love each other do. They remember the small things, the passing mentions, the dreams and regrets. They pay attention." Christian looked stricken, the watch heavy in his palm. For the first time that evening, I saw real pain in his eyes. Not just discomfort at an awkward situation, but genuine anguish. Good, I thought. Let him feel a fraction of what I'm feeling. Sara watched Christian's reaction, a flicker of doubt crossing her face as she witnessed this tangible evidence of a history she could never share. Of a connection built over years rather than months. A strange calm settled over me as I watched them both absorb the reality of what Christian was discarding. Not just a wife, not just a marriage certificate, but 15 years of accumulated understanding, inside jokes, shared references, and mutual growth. "I should go," I said, standing and gathering my purse. The restaurant suddenly felt suffocating, too warm, too crowded with oblivious happy people. "Lori, wait," Christian said, also rising. "Let me at least drive you home." "Home?" I echoed, the word suddenly hollow. "You mean the house where you brought your girlfriend while I was away? The space you've already violated? No thank you. I'll get a car." Sara remained seated, looking increasingly uncomfortable as the gravity of what they were doing to another human being, to me, seemed to finally register on her perfect face. "We should talk about next steps," Christian said, lowering his voice. "Practical matters, the house, our accounts, not tonight," I cut him off. "Tonight was supposed to be our anniversary celebration. I won't spend it discussing the dismantling of our marriage. Your lawyer can contact me." I stepped away from the table but paused, turning back to face them both one last time. "Enjoy your dinner," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my voice, when everything inside me was collapsing. "And Sara? A word of advice. When a man cheats with you, he'll cheat on you. Something to consider as you move forward together." I managed to hold myself together until I was safely inside the Uber. Directions, given to the driver in a voice that sounded oddly detached from my body. Only when the car pulled away from the curb did I allow the first tears to fall, silent and hot against my cheeks as I watched Meridian and the ruins of my marriage recede in the distance. "You okay back there?" the driver asked, meeting my eyes briefly in the rearview mirror. I nodded automatically, not trusting my voice. He seemed to understand, turning up the radio slightly to give me privacy with my grief. I couldn't face going home, not to the house Christian and I had shared, not to the bedroom where he had brought another woman. Instead, I directed the driver to Rose's apartment. Rose, my closest friend, the person who would understand without judgment. During the 20-minute drive, my mind replayed the evening in excruciating detail. The look on Christian's face as he'd introduced Sara, the casual way he'd admitted to their 8-month affair, the photos on his phone, evidence of a secret life conducted in parallel to our marriage, the vintage watch that should have been meaningful but was now just a painful reminder of what I'd thought we had. By the time the car stopped outside Rose's building, I had cycled through shock, disbelief, and the first waves of a rage so intense it frightened me. I paid the driver and stepped out, my legs unsteady beneath me. Rose answered her door in sweatpants and an old concert t-shirt, a glass of wine in hand. Her smile of greeting instantly transformed into concern when she saw my face. "Lori? What happened? Where's Christian?" The sound of his name unleashed something in me. I burst into tears, great heaving sobs that bent me double. Rose pulled me inside, shutting the door and wrapping her arms around me without question. "He's having an affair," I managed between sobs. 8 months. He brought her to our anniversary dinner, introduced her to me. "He what?" Rose pulled back, shock written across her features. "Tonight? Your anniversary? He brought his girlfriend," I confirmed, the word burning like acid in my throat. "Her name is Sara. She's younger, beautiful. He wants a divorce." Rose guided me to her couch, disappearing briefly and returning with a glass of bourbon. "Drink this," she commanded, "then tell me everything." The alcohol burned a path down my throat, anchoring me somehow. I took a deep breath and recounted the entire humiliating evening, the waiting, the introduction, the photos, the vintage watch that Christian had barely registered before I walked out. "That absolute bastard," Rose breathed when I'd finished. "On your anniversary, with her sitting right there. Who does that?" "Someone who stopped loving me a long time ago," I said, surprising myself with the clarity of the realization. "Someone who doesn't even respect me enough to end things honorably." 8 months, Rose repeated, shaking her head in disbelief. "And none of us had any idea. You had no idea." "I should have known," I said, the tears starting again. There were signs. The late nights, the business trips, the way he guarded his phone. I just didn't want to see them. Rose took my hands in hers. This is not your fault. Do you hear me? This is not your fault. You trusted your husband. That's what you're supposed to do in a marriage. But even as she spoke, doubts crept in. Had I been too focused on my work? Too complacent in our relationship? Had I missed opportunities to reconnect? To close the distance that had grown between us? A sick part of me wondered what Sara offered that I didn't. What had drawn Christian to her so completely that he was willing to discard 15 years of marriage? What am I going to do? I whispered, the enormity of the situation crashing over. Me. Our house, our finances, our friends. Everything intertwined after 15 years together. I can't go home. Not tonight. Not knowing he brought her there. You'll stay here, Rose said firmly. As long as you need to. We'll figure this out together. My phone buzzed in my purse. A text from Christian. I'm sorry it happened this way. We should talk when you're ready. I'll stay at a hotel tonight. I showed Rose the message, a fresh wave of anger washing over me. How considerate of him, I said bitterly. Giving me space in my own home after introducing me to his girlfriend. Rose took my phone gently. Let me hang on to this for tonight. You don't need to be reading his texts or seeing his calls. Tomorrow is soon enough to deal with all that. I nodded, grateful for her steady presence as the world I'd built crumbled around me. She brought me a t-shirt and shorts to sleep in, made up the couch with soft blankets, and sat with me as I cycled through tears, rage, and stunned silence. Do you think everyone knew? I asked sometime around midnight, staring at the ceiling. Were we the neighborhood joke? Poor Lori. So clueless while her husband parades around with his younger girlfriend? No, Rose said emphatically. Sara said no one in your social circle knew, right? I believe that. Christian's always been private. Calculating. This wasn't some sloppy, obvious affair. I feel so stupid, I admitted, my voice small in the darkened room. All those late nights I thought he was working. All those business trips. He was with her, Rose, building a relationship with her while coming home to me. You're not stupid, Rose insisted. You're loyal, trusting. Those are virtues, Lori, not flaws. But as the night wore on and sleep evaded me, I couldn't help replaying moments from the past 8 months, recontextualizing them with this new knowledge. The weekend Christian had claimed to be at a conference in Denver. Had he taken Sara somewhere romantic instead? The nights he'd come home late smelling of unfamiliar perfume. Had he even bothered to shower after being with her? The text messages. That made him smile when he thought I wasn't looking. All communications with her? Every memory was now tainted. Every moment suspect. 15 years of history suddenly felt like a facade. A performance rather than a genuine partnership. Had he ever really loved me? Or had I been a convenient stepping stone in his career? A supportive wife who helped him climb the corporate ladder until he no longer needed that support? By dawn, exhaustion had finally overtaken my racing thoughts. I drifted into a fitful sleep, only to be jolted awake by the shrill ring of Rose's landline. She answered in the kitchen, her voice a low murmur I couldn't quite make out. When she returned to the living room, her expression was grim. That was Mabel, she said. Jonah ran into Christian and Sara last night, at the Westin Hotel bar. They were quite cozy, apparently not bothered by running into a mutual friend hours after blowing up your marriage. The news should have hurt. But I was beyond pain now, moving into a strange, cold clarity. Of course they were, I said, sitting up and pushing my tangled hair from my face. Why would he waste a perfectly good Friday night when he's finally free of his inconvenient wife? Rose sat beside me. What do you want to do today? We could go for a drive, get out of the city, or just stay here, order takeout, watch terrible movies. I considered her question, realizing I had no idea how to spend the first day of my new reality. What did people do when their entire life had been dismantled overnight? How did they move through the hours, the minutes, when every familiar routine was now associated with a relationship that no longer existed? "I need to go home," I said finally, surprising myself with the decision. Not to stay, just to get some things, clothes, my laptop, important documents. Rose insisted on coming with me to the house. "You shouldn't have to do this alone," she said as we pulled into the driveway. I was grateful for her presence. The thought of entering the space I'd shared with Christian by myself felt overwhelming. The house looked exactly as I'd left it the previous evening, nothing outwardly reflecting the seismic shift that had occurred in my life. My coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter. Christian's running shoes remained by the door. The orchid I'd been nursing back to health still reached toward the living room window. It was disorienting, this visual continuity in the face of complete emotional rupture. "I'll wait here while you get what you need," Rose said gently. "Take your time." I moved through the house like a ghost, gathering essentials: clothes, toiletries, my laptop, important papers from our home office. In the bedroom, I hesitated before opening the closet we shared. Christian's suits hung neatly beside my dresses. The physical proximity of our belongings, a painful reminder of the life we'd built. As I packed, I noticed little things I'd never paid attention to before. How Christian's side of the bathroom counter was completely cleared, as if he'd already begun the process of moving out. How the framed photo of us that had always sat on his nightstand was conspicuously absent. Small signals that he had been preparing for this moment while I remained oblivious. I was zipping my suitcase when my phone rang, Mabel's name flashing on the screen. I answered hesitantly, unsure if I was ready to discuss what had happened with anyone beyond Rose. "Lori," Mabel said immediately. "I just heard. Jonah told me he saw Christian last night, with someone, at the Westin. I wanted to check on you." "I'm okay," I lied, the words automatic. "Or I will be. Eventually." Rose called and filled me in on what happened at dinner. Mabel continued, "I can't believe he did that to you, on your anniversary of all days." "Neither can I admitted, sinking onto the edge of the bed. Our bed. The bed where Christian had brought Sara. "Jonah is furious," Mabel said. "He confronted Christian at the bar, asked him what the hell he was doing with another woman hours after dropping that bomb on you. Christian just said it was complicated and that they'd appreciate privacy during this difficult time." I laughed bitterly. His difficult time? How considerate of Jonah to worry about Christian's privacy while he parades around with his girlfriend. "That's not what I meant," Mabel backtracked quickly. "Jonah told him exactly where he could shove his privacy. Said, any man who would ambush his wife of 15 years with a girlfriend on their anniversary wasn't the person he thought he knew." The knowledge that Jonah had stood up for me warmed something in my chest. A small reminder that not everyone saw me as disposable. "Are you home alone?" Mabel asked, concern evident in her voice. "Do you want me to come over?" "I'm just grabbing some things," I explained. "Rose is here. I'm staying with her for now." "Good. You shouldn't be alone. And Lori? Jonah and I are here for you, whatever you need. Christian may have chosen her, but the rest of us choose you. Always." Tears pricked my eyes at the simple declaration of loyalty. "Thank you," I managed. "That means more than you know." After hanging up, I finished packing quickly, wanting to leave before I broke down again. As I carried my suitcase downstairs, the doorbell rang. Rose appeared from the kitchen looking alarmed. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked. I shook my head, moving cautiously toward the door. Through the frosted glass panel, I could make out a silhouette. Female, slight. For one wild moment, I thought it might be Sara, coming to stake her claim on my home or perhaps offer some twisted form of apology. Instead, when I opened the door, I found Mia standing on my porch, her expression troubled. Mia, the newest addition to our friend group, the one Christian had met through charity work. "Lori," she said, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "I'm sorry to just show up. I heard what happened. Can we talk?" I hesitated, then stepped back to let her in. Rose watched from the hallway, protective and wary. Mia didn't take a seat, instead standing rigidly in the entryway, clutching her purse like a shield. "I didn't know if I should come," she began. "But after what Jonah said about last night, about seeing Christian with her, I couldn't stay quiet." Something in her tone made me pay closer attention. "What do you mean?" Mia took a deep breath. "I knew about her. About Sara. I've seen them together at charity events. They haven't been subtle in certain circles. Circles they assumed were separate from your life." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Someone in our group had known and hadn't told me. "How long?" I managed to ask. "I only realized a few months ago," Mia said quickly. "And I didn't know what to do. Christian is persuasive. He told me it was complicated, that you two were already separated privately, that he was trying to find the right time to make it official without hurting you." Rose made a disgusted noise from the hallway. "And you believed him?" Mia flushed. "I didn't know Lori well yet. Christian and I served on the same board long before I met the rest of you. He was the one who introduced me to the group. I didn't feel it was my place to interfere in a marriage I knew nothing about." I studied her face, seeing genuine remorse there. "So why are you telling me now?" "Because last night made it clear he lied to me too," Mia said simply. "Your reaction at the restaurant, Jonah told me how shocked you were. There was no private separation, no mutual understanding. Just a man cheating on his wife and using people like me to cover for him." I absorbed this, another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Christian hadn't just been hiding Sara from me. He'd been actively creating a narrative to support his deception, using Mia's relative newness to our group to his advantage. "There's more," Mia continued hesitantly. "The Thompson project they've been working on, it's not just business. They're planning to leave Bryant Financial together, start their own firm. They've been recruiting clients, preparing to take accounts with them when they leave." This was a new betrayal, professional as well as personal. Christian was dismantling not just our marriage, but potentially his career at the company where he'd worked for over a decade. "How do you know this?" Rose asked sharply. "Because they approached me as a potential investor," Mia admitted. "I have family money they thought I might contribute to their startup. I declined, but not before they shared quite a bit about their plans." My mind reeled with implications. Christian wasn't just leaving me, he was orchestrating a complete life overhaul, new relationship, new business, new future, all while maintaining the facade of our marriage. "Thank you for telling me," I said to Mia, meaning it despite the fresh pain her revelations caused. "I needed to know." Mia nodded, clearly relieved to have unburdened herself. "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner, and I'm sorry this is happening to you, Lori. For what it's worth, I think Christian is making the biggest mistake of his life." After Mia left, Rose and I sat in stunned silence at my kitchen table, the table where Christian and I had shared countless meals, made plans, built a life. "Well," Rose said finally, "at least now you know it wasn't just about the relationship. This was a calculated career move too. Sara wasn't just a mistress, she was a business partner." Does that make it better or worse? I wondered aloud. Rose considered this. Better, maybe. It means it wasn't just about you, about something you did or didn't do. This was Christian's midlife crisis package deal. New woman, new company, new identity. Despite everything, I found myself laughing. A small, broken sound, but genuine nonetheless. Midlife crisis package deal. That's exactly what it is. The ultimate cliché. Rose agreed, squeezing my hand. And you deserve so much better than a cliché, Lori. As we prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with multiple notifications, messages from friends who had heard what happened and were reaching out to offer support. Jonah and Mabel asking if I wanted to come for dinner. Other colleagues and acquaintances expressing outrage on my behalf. I spent the next week in a fog of grief and disbelief, moving between Rose's apartment and my office on autopilot. Work became my sanctuary. The one part of my life, Christian, had never fully infiltrated. The one thing that remained completely mine. I threw myself into projects, staying late at the firm, finding solace in the concrete problems of structural integrity and spatial design that could be solved with enough thought and expertise. Rose provided a steady presence, never pushing me, to talk but always available when I needed to. Mabel and Jonah brought dinner several times, their quiet support a balm to my wounded spirit. Mia sent thoughtful texts, sharing any information she thought might be useful as I navigated the dissolution of my marriage. Even my usually stoic business partner, Evan, offered unexpected compassion, rearranging my schedule to give me space when needed and taking on client meetings when I couldn't face them. Christian had moved out completely by the fourth day, sending a clinical email listing what he'd taken and what he'd left. He'd hired a moving company, a detail that struck me as particularly cruel. Strangers packing up the artifacts of our shared life while I was at work. He was staying at the Westin. Temporarily, he informed me, until he found a more permanent arrangement, with Sara presumably, though he didn't say as much. On the 8th night after the anniversary dinner, I found myself alone in Rose's apartment, staring at the separation agreement Christian's lawyer had emailed earlier that day. The legal document reduced 15 years of marriage to assets and liabilities, a cold accounting of what we'd built and how it would be divided. Christian was offering to let me keep the house, a gesture he clearly thought was generous. In exchange, he wanted the vacation property in Colorado, most of our investment portfolio, and his retirement accounts untouched. As I scrolled through the document, a strange calm descended over me. This was really happening. My marriage was ending. The future I had planned no longer existed. And yet, here I was, still breathing, still working, still putting one foot in front of the other. I closed the laptop without responding to the email and moved to the window, looking out at the city lights. For the first time since that devastating dinner, I allowed myself to really consider what had happened, not just as something done to me, but as a potential turning point. Christian had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. He had built a parallel life with another woman, brought her into our home, planned a future with her while maintaining the pretense of our marriage. He had lied, manipulated, and finally humiliated me publicly. These were the facts. But as painful as those facts were, they led to an inescapable conclusion. The man I had loved, the man I had built my life around, was not worthy of that love. Not worthy of my grief now. Not worthy of the power I was giving him over my emotional state. The realization didn't immediately ease the pain, but it shifted something essential inside me. I had been operating from a position of loss, mourning the husband, the marriage, the future I thought I had. But what if instead, I viewed this as an escape from a marriage that had already failed, from a husband who had never truly honored what we built together? That night, I slept soundly for the first time since the revelation. I woke feeling different, not healed, not whole, but somehow more present in my own skin. I showered, dressed in one of my favorite outfits rather than the drab, functional clothes I'd been hiding in, and even applied makeup, small acts of self-care that had felt impossible just days before. When I arrived at the office, Evan did a double take. "You look better," he said cautiously. I managed a small smile. "I feel better. Or at least, I'm starting to." He studied me for a moment. "Good. That's good, Lori. And just so you know, we landed the Riverside project. The client specifically requested you as lead architect. They did, I asked, genuinely surprised. The Riverside development was a major project, the kind that could elevate our small firm significantly. Even knowing about my personal situation? Evan shrugged. I think your personal situation actually worked in your favor. Mabel's sister is friends with the developer's wife. Word got around about what Christian did. Apparently, the developer's wife is a divorcee who went through something similar. She pushed for you to get the job. I absorbed this information with a strange mix of embarrassment and gratitude. My private pain had become public knowledge, it seemed, but in this case, it had created an unexpected opportunity. I'll call them today, I said. Set up a proper meeting. Later that afternoon, as I reviewed my portfolio in preparation for the Riverside meeting, I found myself looking at my work with fresh eyes. The buildings I'd designed, the spaces I'd created, they were good. Some were exceptional. For years, I had downplayed my professional success, careful not to overshadow Christian's achievements, mindful of the fragile male ego I'd been taught to protect. No more, I decided. This project would be my best work yet. Not despite what I was going through, but perhaps because of it. My pain could fuel my creativity. My sense of dislocation could inform how I designed spaces meant to feel like home. That evening, instead of returning to Rose's apartment, I made a decision. It was time to go home. To my home. I texted Rose to let her know, brushing aside her concerns. I need to do this, I wrote. Reclaim my space. Walking into the house without Christian's presence was both eerie and liberating. I moved from room to room, noting the gaps where his belongings had been, the spaces I could now fill however I chose. In the bedroom, I stripped the bed completely, bundling the sheets and comforter into garbage bags. Tomorrow I would buy new bedding, erase the memory of Sara in my personal space. In the kitchen, I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion, an expensive Bordeaux Christian had selected. I poured a generous glass and carried it to the home office that had primarily been his domain. The built-in bookshelves were half empty now, his business books and biographical tomes removed. His desk remained, though, the heavy antique he'd inherited from his father. I sat at it, swiveling in the leather chair that had always felt too large for me. From this vantage point, I surveyed the room, reimagining it as my space. A design, studio perhaps, or simply a place for me to pay bills and manage my life without Christian's input. My phone buzzed. A text from Christian. Did you receive the separation agreement? My lawyer needs your response by Friday. I stared at the message, feeling the old anxiety rise up and then, surprisingly, subside. A week ago, this text would have sent me spiraling. Now it just felt like an administrative task, unpleasant but manageable. I'm reviewing it with my lawyer, I replied simply, though I hadn't yet contacted one. I would, though. Tomorrow. Not the attorney Christian and I had shared for years, but someone recommended by Rose who specialized in high-asset divorces. Someone who would fight for what I deserved after 15 years of supporting Christian's career, often at the expense of my own. Setting down my phone, I turned my attention to the desk itself, opening drawers that had always been Christian's domain. Most were empty now, but in the bottom drawer I found a forgotten manila folder. Inside were early sketches of our house renovation, my designs, the vision I'd had for transforming the dated structure into our dream home. I spread the drawings across the desk, remembering the excitement I'd felt during that process, the creative energy that had flowed through me. Christian had appreciated the result, but had never fully understood my passion for the project itself. As long as it looks good and comes in under budget, he'd said repeatedly, missing the point entirely. Looking at the sketches now, I recognized the quality of the work, the thoughtfulness of the design choices. I had created something beautiful, something that reflected not just aesthetic preferences but a deeper understanding of how spaces shape human experience. In that moment, sitting at Christian's desk surrounded by evidence of my own talent, I felt something shift inside me, a reclamation not just of physical space but of my sense of self. Christian had betrayed me, yes, but he had also, inadvertently, set me free. The next morning, I woke in my own bed, on new sheets I'd purchased, during a spontaneous late-night shopping trip. The mattress still held the indentation of Christian's body on what had been his side, but I'd positioned myself firmly in the center, reclaiming the space physically just as I was beginning to reclaim it emotionally. I had a busy day ahead, a meeting with the Riverside developers in the morning, followed by an appointment with Diana Winters, the divorce attorney Rose had recommended. I dressed with intention, choosing a structured navy suit that projected confidence and competence. As I applied makeup in the bathroom mirror, I studied my reflection, the slight shadows under my eyes, the new tension lines around my mouth. I looked different somehow. Older, perhaps, but also more present. The Riverside meeting went better than I could have hoped. The developer, Martin Keller, and his team responded enthusiastically to my initial concepts for the mixed-use property they were planning. Your understanding of how residential and commercial spaces can coexist harmoniously is exactly what we've been looking for, Martin said as I guided them through my preliminary sketches. And the sustainability elements you've incorporated, that's the future of urban development. I felt a flush of pride at the compliment. For too long, I'd downplayed my expertise, presenting my ideas tentatively to make others, especially Christian, more comfortable. Today, I'd spoken with authority about my vision, and the response had been overwhelmingly positive. As the meeting wrapped up, Martin's associate, a sharp-eyed woman named Diane, lingered behind. "This isn't entirely professional," she began, "but I wanted to say that I admire how you're handling this project despite your personal circumstances. Martin's wife mentioned what you're going through. My ex did something similar 3 years ago, after 18 years of marriage, no less." I stiffened slightly, uncomfortable with the reminder that my private pain had become gossip fodder in professional circles. Diane seemed to sense my discomfort. "I'm not trying to pry," she clarified. "I just want you to know that while it feels impossible now, it does get better. And sometimes, professionally speaking, being underestimated can become your greatest advantage." I considered her words on the drive to Diana Winters' office. Being underestimated, was that what had happened with Christian? Had he assumed I would simply fall apart without him, that my identity was so thoroughly intertwined with his that I couldn't function independently? Diana Winters' office occupied the corner suite of a sleek downtown building. The woman herself matched her environment, polished, direct, and immediately commanding. In her mid-50s with silver-streaked dark hair and intelligent eyes, she exuded a confidence I found reassuring. "So," she said after I'd outlined the situation, "your husband ambushed you with his girlfriend on your anniversary, emptied your shared home while you were at work, and now wants you to sign a separation agreement that significantly favors him financially." She shook her head. "Men never cease to amaze me with their audacity." "The house is worth more than the Colorado property," I pointed out, trying to be fair despite everything. "And he is the higher earner." Diana's eyebrow arched. "And you've spent 15 years supporting his career, often accommodating his schedule over your own professional opportunities. You've maintained the home, managed your social calendar, and been the perfect corporate wife while also running your own business." She leaned forward. "Lori, you're entitled to much more than a house with 15 years of memories you might not even want to keep." Her words struck a chord. I hadn't considered that keeping the house might be more punishment than reward. Forcing me to live surrounded by reminders of my failed marriage. "What would you suggest?" I asked. "Don't respond to the separation agreement," she said firmly. Let me draft a counterproposal. In the meantime, I want you to focus on 3 things. She began ticking them off on her fingers. First, document everything. Communications with Christian, any information about their affair, particularly anything suggesting they used marital resources to conduct it. Second, secure your finances. Open new accounts in your name only if you haven't already. And third, start envisioning what you want your life to look like after this divorce is finalized. That last directive caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on reacting to Christian's betrayal that I hadn't allowed myself to think proactively about my future. I don't know what I want, I admitted. Diana smiled, a warm expression that softened her professional demeanor. That's the most honest answer you could give. And it's perfectly normal. But starting today, I want you to give yourself permission to imagine possibilities beyond this marriage. I left her office feeling lighter somehow, armed with practical next steps and a new perspective. On impulse, I called Rose. "Can you meet me at the house tonight?" I asked. "I want to rearrange some furniture." That evening, Rose arrived with Mabel in tow, both of them bearing wine and determined expressions. "We're having a renovation party," Rose announced. Mabel brought paint samples. "I've got takeout coming in an hour. We're reclaiming this space for you." For the next several hours, we transformed the living room, moving the heavy leather sofa Christian had insisted on to a different wall, relocating the television, bringing in the reading chair I'd loved but Christian had relegated to the guest room. We poured wine, played music I enjoyed, but Christian had dismissed as too emotional, and debated paint colors for a feature wall. "What about this?" Mabel asked, holding up a vibrant teal sample. "It's bold, unexpected." Christian would hate it, I said automatically, then paused, a laugh bubbling up. "Which means it's perfect." As we worked, I shared details from my meeting with Diana, including her directive to envision my post-divorce life. "She's right," Mabel said, settled cross-legged on the floor with a glass of wine. "This is your opportunity to completely reinvent your life if you want to." "I don't even know where to start," I admitted. For 15 years, every decision was filtered through our relationship: where to live, how to spend weekends, which social invitations to accept. Even my career choices were influenced by what worked best for us as a couple. "So start small," Rose suggested. "What's something you've always wanted to do that Christian vetoed or discouraged?" I thought for a moment. "Travel to Japan," I said. Finally. We'd been saving for it, but Christian always found reasons to postpone. The timing wasn't right. He was too busy at work. He was concerned about the language barrier. I trailed off, realizing how many of my desires had been subtly but consistently deprioritized. "Japan it is, then," Mabel declared. "Once this divorce is settled, you're going to Japan." Solo female traveler finding herself among the cherry blossoms. The image made me smile. Myself, independent and adventurous, exploring a culture I'd long been fascinated by without having to consider Christian's preferences or comfort level. "And your work," Rose added. "You've always held back from pursuing certain projects because they would have required more travel or irregular hours. What if you didn't have to consider Christian's schedule anymore?" The possibilities began to unfold in my mind. Larger projects, international clients, collaborations with designers I'd admired from afar. For 15 years, I'd been fitting my ambitions into the spaces left by Christian's career. Now, those constraints were gone. I could expand the firm, I said, the idea taking shape as I spoke it aloud. Hire more staff. Take on the kinds of projects I've always dreamed about but turned down because they didn't fit our life. Mabel raised her glass. To Lori 2.0, architect extraordinaire, world traveler, and woman who no longer shrinks herself to make mediocre men comfortable. We clinked glasses, laughing, and in that moment, surrounded by the half-transformed living room and these women who genuinely cared about me, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel again so soon. Hope. The first indication that Christian wasn't going to make this transition easy came 3 days after my meeting with Diana Winters. I woke to a series of increasingly irate text messages, starting with confusion and ending with outright hostility. "Why haven't you responded to the separation agreement?" Sent 7:15 a.m. "My lawyer says there's been no movement on your end." 7:45 a.m. "We had a verbal agreement about the split. Why are you dragging this out?" 8:22 a.m. "This is exactly why things didn't work between us. You're being passive-aggressive instead of just communicating." 9:03 a.m. I stared at the messages, noting how quickly he'd moved from inquiry to accusation to personal attack. This was a pattern I recognized from our marriage. Christian's inability to tolerate any deviation from his expectations, his immediate assumption that any conflict was due to my shortcomings rather than his actions. Diana had advised me to minimize direct communication with Christian, channeling everything through legal representatives once they were established. But something about his rapid escalation, his attempt to put me on the defensive when he was the one who had shattered our marriage, ignited a quiet fury inside me. I typed a simple response. "I'm not being passive-aggressive. I'm being strategic. My lawyer will be in touch with yours." His reply came instantly. "You hired a lawyer already? That's an unnecessary expense. We could have worked this out between us." The audacity was breathtaking. After ambushing me with his girlfriend, emptying our shared home without warning, and sending me a one-sided separation agreement, he genuinely believed we should work this out between us, undoubtedly on his terms. I didn't respond further, silencing my phone before heading to the office. But the exchange had rattled me more than I wanted to admit. Despite my growing resolve, despite the support system rallying around me, Christian still had the power to unsettle my equilibrium, with just a few carefully aimed words. That evening, as I returned home from work, I found Christian's sleek BMW parked in the driveway. My stomach clenched at the sight of it, at the realization that he was inside the house, my house, waiting for me. I sat in my car for a long moment, considering my options. I could drive away, call Rose, delay this confrontation. But something in me rebelled against the idea of retreating from my own home, allowing Christian to dictate when and how we would interact. Drawing a deep breath, I gathered my bag and walked purposefully to the front door. Christian had left most of his keys behind when he moved out, but I'd changed the locks anyway, one of Diana's first recommendations. I unlocked the door and stepped inside to find Christian standing in the living room, his expression a mix of surprise and irritation. "You changed the locks," he said accusingly. "You moved out," I replied, setting my bag down with deliberate calm. "How did you get in?" The patio door was unlocked. He gestured vaguely toward the back of the house. "When did you rearrange everything in here?" I glanced around the transformed living room, the new paint color on the accent wall, the relocated furniture, the artwork I'd selected to replace the bland corporate pieces Christian had preferred. "Last week," I said simply. "Why are you here, Christian?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I knew well. "We need to talk about this lawyer situation. Sara thinks—" "Stop," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "I don't care what Sara thinks. She doesn't get input on how our divorce proceeds." Christian looked genuinely taken aback, as if it hadn't occurred to him that invoking his girlfriend's name might be inappropriate or hurtful. "I just meant—" "I know what you meant," I said, cutting him off again. "You've discussed our separation. With her, and now you're bringing her opinions into conversations with me. That stops now. Our divorce is between us and our respective lawyers. Period." He stared at me, clearly unaccustomed to this version of me, direct, unflinching, unwilling to accommodate his discomfort. "This isn't like you, Lori," he said finally. "You've always been reasonable, accommodating." That was before my husband introduced me to his girlfriend on our anniversary. I replied, my voice steady despite the surge of emotion the memory evoked. Before I discovered he'd been living a double life for 8 months, before he emptied our home while I was at work. Christian had the grace to look momentarily ashamed, but he quickly rallied. I'm not here to rehash all that. I'm here to talk practical matters. The separation agreement will be handled by my lawyer, I finished for him. Diana Winters. She'll be contacting your attorney tomorrow with our counter-proposal. Counter-proposal? Christian's brow furrowed. The terms I offered were more than fair. You get the house where you brought your girlfriend while I was visiting my sister, I reminded him. How generous of you to let me keep it. He flushed, the first genuine indication that he recognized the magnitude of his betrayal. That was a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. No, I agreed. You shouldn't have. Just like you shouldn't have cleaned out our joint savings account without discussion, or used our shared vacation property for romantic getaways with Sara, or planned to launch a competing financial firm using connections you made at Bryant, where I supported your career for 15 years. Christian's expression shifted from embarrassment to shock. How did you— Mia told me everything, I said, a small flicker of satisfaction arising at his obvious discomfort. About your business plans with Sara. About how you misrepresented our marriage, claiming we were already separated privately. About how you tried to recruit her as an investor. Christian's face hardened. Mia had no right to share private business discussions. And you had no right to cheat on your wife for 8 months? But here we are. We stood facing each other across the living room, the room I'd reclaimed, the space that now reflected my aesthetic rather than our compromised one. The physical distance between us mirrored the emotional gulf that had opened, seemingly overnight, but in reality, developing slowly over years of small betrayals and dismissals. This isn't going to be an amicable split if you pursue this path, Christian warned, his tone coolly professional now. My offer was generous. If you push for more, I'll fight you every step of the way. I considered his words, recognizing the threat beneath them. Christian excelled at corporate negotiations. He was used to leveraging advantages, finding weaknesses, and applying pressure until the other party capitulated. He expected me to fold, to avoid conflict as I often had during our marriage. I'm not looking for a fight, I said carefully, but I am looking for fairness. Diana will outline what that looks like from my perspective. Your lawyer can review it, and we can proceed from there. I moved toward the front door, opening it in a clear dismissal. And next time, call before you come over. This isn't your home anymore. Christian hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to being dismissed. For a moment, I thought he might argue further, but instead, he gathered his coat and moved toward the door. As he passed me, he paused. You've changed, he said, his tone somewhere between accusation and reluctant respect. I met his gaze directly. Yes, I agreed. I have. After he left, I double-checked all the doors, making a mental note to have the patio lock replaced. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and called Diana, recounting the encounter in detail. This is actually good, she said after I'd finished. He's shown his hand early. He's going to try to intimidate you, to make you doubt yourself and your entitlements. Classic bully tactics. It won't work, I said with more confidence than I entirely felt. No, Diana agreed. It won't. Because unlike the woman he married 15 years ago, you now recognize his playbook. And more importantly, you've stopped believing you deserve less than your fair share. 3 weeks after Christian's unexpected visit, Diana called with news that simultaneously infuriated and vindicated me. We've received financial disclosure. From Christian's side, she said, her tone reflecting professional restraint over what I suspected was personal outrage. And there are discrepancies. What kind of discrepancies? I asked, stepping away from my drafting table where I'd been working on the Riverside project. Remember how you mentioned the joint savings account that was emptied? It appears that money didn't just go toward his living expenses as he claimed. Bank records show a significant portion, nearly $30,000, was transferred to a business account for something called Meridian Ventures LLC. My grip tightened on the phone. That's the new firm he's starting with Sara. Exactly, Diana confirmed. He used marital funds to finance a business venture with his girlfriend, without your knowledge or consent. That's a clear breach of fiduciary duty to you as his spouse. I closed my eyes, processing this information. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It was concrete, documented, undeniable. What does this mean for the divorce proceedings? I asked. It means we have leverage, Diana replied, a note of satisfaction entering her voice. Christian wants this to be quick and quiet. He doesn't want Bryant Financial knowing he's planning to leave and take clients with him. He doesn't want his professional reputation tarnished by details of how he conducted himself during your marriage. The strategy was clear. Christian had miscalculated, believing I would quietly accept whatever terms he offered to avoid conflict. Instead, his own actions had created vulnerabilities we could exploit to ensure a fair settlement. I've requested a meeting, Diana continued. Both parties and their lawyers. Tomorrow at 4 in my office. Can you make it? The timing would require rescheduling a client call, but this took priority. I'll be there, I assured her. That night, sleep eluded me. I rehearsed what I might say to Christian, cycling through anger, cool detachment, and pointed accusation. By morning, I had settled on a strategy that aligned with the person I was becoming rather than the wife I had been. Direct, dignified, and unwavering in my demand for respect. Diana's office reflected her approach to law, elegant but functional, designed to project competence rather than intimidate. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that made me feel armored for battle. Christian and his attorney, Gerald Weber, arrived precisely on time. Christian looked slightly haggard, I noted with a mixture of concern and satisfaction, the smooth confidence I'd always admired now tinged with strain. He nodded tersely in my direction but didn't speak as introductions were made, and we all took seats around Diana's conference table. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting, Diana began, her tone brisk but not hostile. I believe we can make significant progress today if we approach our discussions with transparency and good faith. Gerald, a silver-haired man with the polished manner of someone accustomed to high-stakes negotiations, nodded. We're certainly interested in an efficient resolution. Excellent, Diana smiled. Then let's address the elephant in the room. She slid a folder across the table. Financial disclosures reveal that $28,750 of marital funds were diverted to Meridian Ventures LLC, a company Mr. Hayes established with his colleague without Mrs. Hayes's knowledge or consent. Gerald's expression remained neutral as he reviewed the documents, but I noticed Christian shift uncomfortably in his seat. This creates complications, Diana continued, not only regarding the division of assets, but potentially raising questions of breach of fiduciary duty that Mr. Hayes owed to Mrs. Hayes during their marriage. Gerald cleared his throat. While the timing of these transactions is perhaps unfortunate, my client maintains that these were legitimate business investments that would have ultimately benefited both parties had the marriage continued. I couldn't help it. A small, incredulous laugh escaped me. All eyes turned in my direction. Do you have something to add, Mrs. Hayes? Gerald asked, his tone suggesting he'd prefer I remain silent. I glanced at Diana, who gave a slight nod of encouragement. I find it difficult to believe that a business venture with the woman my husband was having an affair with would have ultimately benefited me, I said calmly. Particularly when I was never informed of either the relationship or the financial investment. Christian's jaw tightened. That's not entirely accurate, Lori. The business and our personal relationship are separate matters. Are they? I challenged, meeting his gaze directly. Then why was the company formed the same month your affair began? Why use our joint savings rather than your personal accounts? Why keep it completely secret from me if it was an above-board investment? Christian had no immediate response, which was answer enough. Diana smoothly redirected the conversation. Our counterproposal reflects these new revelations, she said, distributing copies of a document to Gerald and Christian. In addition to equitable division of known assets, we're seeking compensation for funds inappropriately diverted to Meridian Ventures, plus a more reasonable division of retirement accounts given the length of the marriage and Mrs. Hayes's contributions to Mr. Hayes's career advancement. Gerald skimmed the document, his expression souring slightly. These terms are significantly more aggressive than what we proposed. They're fair, Diana countered firmly. And they reflect reality rather than Mr. Hayes's preferred narrative. As the lawyers continued their verbal sparring, I watched Christian. He was reading through our counter-proposal, his expression darkening with each page. Finally, he looked up, his gaze finding mine. This feels punitive, he said quietly. It's not meant to be, I replied honestly. It's meant to be fair. I supported your career for 15 years, Christian. I relocated twice for your promotions. I entertained clients and colleagues. I maintained our home and our social connections. I contributed to our financial stability while accommodating your professional needs above my own. I'm not asking for punishment. I'm asking for recognition of those contributions. Gerald attempted to interject, but Christian silenced him with a raised hand. Can we speak privately? He asked me. Diana and I exchanged glances. 5 minutes, she conceded. We'll step out. When the lawyers had left, Christian leaned forward, his voice lowered. What are you doing, Lori? This isn't like you. That's the second time you've said that, I observed. Maybe you never really knew me. Or maybe this is who I become when my husband betrays me in every possible way. He winced visibly. I know I hurt you, but this... He gestured to the counter-proposal. This feels like revenge. It's not revenge, I insisted. It's self-respect. It's recognizing my own value in a way I didn't during our marriage. And frankly, Christian, it's holding you accountable for choices you made deliberately and repeatedly. What do you want from me? He asked, frustration evident in his voice. An apology? Fine, I'm sorry. I handled things badly. I should have been honest sooner. The apology, if it could even be called that, struck me as so inadequate that it was almost comical. Sorry he handled things badly. Not sorry he had betrayed our vows, decimated our future, disrespected me in the most fundamental way possible. I don't want your apology, I said quietly. I want you to demonstrate, through actions rather than words, that you recognize the damage you've caused. Starting with a fair financial settlement that acknowledges both my past contributions and the future you stole from me. Christian stared at me, seeming to truly see me for perhaps the first time in years. You really have changed, he said finally. Yes, I agreed. And it's long overdue. 2 months after the confrontation in Diana's office, I sat on my back patio watching the sunset with a glass of wine in hand. The divorce was finally settled, not entirely on my terms, but far more equitably than Christian's initial offering. In the end, practicality had prevailed over emotion on both sides. Christian, eager to launch Meridian Ventures without the shadow of scandal, had ultimately conceded to most of Diana's demands. I received half of our retirement savings, compensation for the funds diverted to his new business, and a percentage of his Bryant Financial stock options that had accumulated during our marriage. I kept the house, though I wasn't certain I would, stay in it long-term, and Christian retained the Colorado property. The document signing had been surprisingly anticlimactic. We'd met at Diana's office, exchanged minimal pleasantries, and signed where indicated. Christian had seemed deflated, his earlier resistance giving way to resignation. As we prepared to part ways, legally finally, he'd hesitated. I never Meant to hurt you, Lori, he'd said, his voice low. I know that's hard to believe, but it's true. I'd studied him for a moment. This man I'd spent 15 years loving. This stranger I now barely recognized. The problem is, Christian, you never really saw me. Not as an equal partner, not as someone with dreams as valuable as yours. So whether you meant to hurt me or not doesn't really matter. You never considered me enough to factor my feelings into your decisions. He'd had no response to that, just a slight nod before turning to leave. I'd watched him go, waiting for the rush of emotion, grief, anger, relief, but instead had felt only a quiet certainty that this chapter of my life was truly closing. Now, as twilight settled over my garden, my phone buzzed with a text from Rose. It's official. How are you feeling? I considered the question carefully. How was I feeling? Not jubilant or triumphant, as I might have expected. Not devastated or lost, as I had initially feared. Instead, I felt steady. Centered in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Perhaps ever. I'm good, I texted back. Really good. Having dinner with Mabel and Jonah later to mark the occasion. Rose's response came quickly. Perfect. Quiet celebration with people who actually care about you. Very on brand for the new Lori. The new Lori. The phrase resonated unexpectedly. There was truth in it. I had changed, fundamentally and irrevocably. Not just because of Christian's betrayal, but because of how I'd chosen to respond to it. I had discovered strength I hadn't known I possessed, clarity I'd never before achieved, and a sense of self that existed independently of any relationship. The divorce papers weren't just the end of my marriage. They were the beginning of a life truly my own. For the first time in 15 years, perhaps longer, I answered to no one but myself. My time, my space, my decisions, all mine alone. The realization was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. 1 year to the day after that fateful anniversary dinner, I stood in the arrivals hall of Tokyo's Narita Airport, travel-weary but exhilarated. Cherry blossom season was just beginning, and I had 2 weeks to explore a country I'd dreamed of visiting for over a decade. The journey hadn't been impulsive. After the divorce was finalized, I'd focused first on rebuilding my financial security and expanding my architecture firm. The Riverside project had been a spectacular success, leading to 3 more major commissions. I'd hired 2 junior architects and a project manager, allowing me to be more selective about the work I took on. I'd sold the house 6 months after the divorce, unable to fully reclaim it from the memories of betrayal it contained. The real estate market had been favorable, and the proceeds had funded both a comfortable downtown apartment and this long-awaited trip to Japan. Navigating the busy airport, I felt a confidence that would have been unimaginable 18 months earlier. The woman who had sat shell-shocked across from her husband and his girlfriend would never have embarked on an international journey alone. She had been defined by her relationship, her identity entangled with Christians to the point where separation seemed unthinkable. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, more certain, more complete in herself. My phone buzzed as I waited for my luggage, a group text from Rose, Mabel, and Mia. Arrived safely? Send pics of your first meal. I smiled, snapping a quick selfie with the airport in the background. These women had been my anchors during the darkest days of the divorce, and now they were my cheerleaders as I embarked on adventures I'd once thought impossible. As I collected my luggage and headed toward ground transportation, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here, not the 14-hour flight, but the emotional passage from betrayed wife to independent woman. Christian's cruelty had been the catalyst, but my transformation had been my own accomplishment. Each decision to stand firm, each boundary established, each moment of choosing myself instead of capitulating to make someone else comfortable, these had been the true turning points. I had learned that endings, even painful ones, created space for new beginnings. That betrayal, while devastating, could also be clarifying, revealing what and who truly mattered. That the dismantling of one dream could lead to the discovery of others, dormant but vibrant once given light and attention. Outside, the airport, Tokyo sprawled before me, a city of contrasts, of ancient traditions alongside breathtaking innovation. Much like the life I was building, it contained multitudes, the familiar and the strange, the challenging and the beautiful. As I boarded the train that would take me to my hotel, I received a final text, this one from Evan, my business partner. Kawaguchi called. They want to move forward with our design for the cultural center. Take a day to celebrate in Tokyo, then we can discuss details when you're ready. I smiled, tucking the phone away. The news could wait. For now, I wanted simply to be present in this moment, a moment that belonged entirely to me. The woman who had once planned her life around someone else's needs was gone. In her place was someone who recognized her own value, who understood that the most important relationship she would ever have was with herself. Someone who knew that the end of one story was merely the opening chapter of another, one she was writing alone, on her own terms, with her own voice. As the train pulled away from the station, carrying me toward new experiences and possibilities, I felt a quiet joy settle in my chest. Not the frantic happiness of someone desperate to prove they're doing well after heartbreak, but the steady contentment of a person who has found her way home to herself. And that, I realized, was the greatest transformation of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.